A few years ago, I worked the night shift at a gas station just off the highway. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but it paid the bills, and I didn't mind the solitude. The station was small, with a single pump and a cramped convenience store stocked with the basics: chips, soda, and overpriced snacks. Most nights were quiet. A few truckers would stop for fuel, or locals would swing by for a late-night coffee. But there was always a lull around 2 a.m., when the world seemed to fall completely silent. That's when things started to get strange. It started with the security cameras. The station had an old, grainy system with a single monitor behind the counter. It cycled through 4 views: the front lot, the pump, the back alley, and the interior of the store. I'd glance at it occasionally, more out of boredom than anything else. One night, around 2:15 a.m., I noticed something on the screen. The camera pointed at the pump showed a figure standing just outside the light's reach. It was hard to make out any details, a tall, shadowy shape that didn't move. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe a hitchhiker waiting for a ride. But the figure didn't come closer or leave. It just stood there, motionless. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. "Hey!" I called out. "You need something?" No answer. The figure was gone. I went back inside, chalking it up to my tired eyes. But when I looked at the monitor again, the figure was back, standing in the same spot. This time, I didn't go outside. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to move, but it stayed perfectly still. I turned off the monitor, deciding to ignore it. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. The next night, it happened again. Around the same time, 2:15 a.m., the figure appeared on the monitor. This time, it was closer, standing near the edge of the pump's light. I could just barely make out a face, pale and featureless, with hollow eyes that seemed to look directly at the camera. I didn't go outside. Things escalated quickly after that. Each night, the figure came closer. By the 4th night, it was standing directly under the pump's light, its face clearer now. It wasn't human. Its skin was gray and stretched tight over its skull, and its mouth was twisted into an unnatural grin. I tried calling the station manager, but the line went straight to voicemail. I considered leaving, but the thought of stepping outside and passing by the pumps made my stomach churn. I decided to wait it out, keeping one eye on the monitor and the other on the front door. At 3 a.m., the figure disappeared from the monitor. I sighed in relief, thinking the worst was over, but then I heard it. A faint tapping sound, coming from the glass door at the front of the store. My heart raced as I turned toward the door. At first, I didn't see anything. The lot was empty, the pumps bathed in cold fluorescent light. But then, just outside the edge of the light, I saw it. The figure was standing there, staring at me through the glass. Its head tilted slightly, and it raised one hand, pressing it against the door. The tapping continued, louder now, rhythmic and deliberate. I backed away, grabbing the phone to call 911. My hand shook as I dialed, but before I could hit call, the lights in the store flickered and went out. I froze in the darkness, the only light coming from the dim glow of the monitor. The figure was gone from the camera, but the tapping continued, echoing through the silence. Then it stopped. The silence was worse. I stood there, gripping the phone, my breath shallow and ragged. Slowly, I edged toward the counter, fumbling for the flashlight we kept in the drawer. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the aisles of the store. Everything was as it should be, no signs of movement, no shadows lurking in the corners. But when I turned toward the door, my flashlight flickered and died. The glass door shattered. I screamed, stumbling backward as the sound echoed through the store. When I looked up, the figure was inside. It stood motionless in the center of the store, its hollow eyes fixed on me. "Why are you here?" it said, its voice low and distorted, like a recording played in reverse. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The figure tilted its head again, its grin widening. "You shouldn't have stayed," it whispered. I don't remember much after that. The next thing I knew, the sun was rising, and I was sitting on the floor behind the counter, clutching the flashlight. The store was empty, the glass door intact, as if nothing had happened. I quit that morning, leaving my keys and a brief note for the manager. I didn't care about the paycheck or the explanation. I just wanted to get as far away from that station as possible. I've never been back, but sometimes, late at night, I think about that figure. I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next unlucky soul to work the late shift. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the faint tapping again. When I got the job as an overnight cleaner at the local office building, I thought it would be easy money. The place was quiet, and my only tasks were to empty trash bins, mop floors, and wipe down desks. The building had 8 floors, and the cleaning crew was small, just me and an older guy named Carl who worked the first 4 floors while I handled the upper ones. Carl had worked there for years and seemed unfazed by anything. On my first night, he gave me a quick rundown of the rules: stay out of the basement, don't mess with the elevators after 2 a.m., and never, under any circumstances, stay on the 7th floor longer than you need to. I laughed, thinking he was just messing with me, but his face stayed deadly serious. "I mean it," he said. "Just do your job and don't ask questions." The first few nights were uneventful. The building was empty after 10 p.m., and the quiet was almost peaceful. I'd put on my headphones, listen to music, and work my way through the floors. Every now and then, I'd see Carl, and we'd exchange a quick nod before going back to our respective tasks. It wasn't until my 5th night that I started noticing strange things. It began with the 7th floor. The first time I cleaned it, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was like every other floor, rows of cubicles, conference rooms, and offices. But something about it felt wrong. The air was colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should. I chalked it up to exhaustion and didn't think much of it. But as the week went on, the 7th floor started to get to me. The lights flickered more often on that floor, and sometimes I'd hear faint noises, soft whispers, the creak of a chair, or the sound of footsteps when I knew no one else was there. Once, I found a single desk chair spinning slowly in the middle of a conference room, even though I hadn't touched it. Then there were the elevators. Every night, like clockwork, one of them would stop on the 7th floor at exactly 2:17 a.m. The doors would open, revealing an empty car, and then close again without a sound. I asked Carl about it, but he just shook his head. "Don't look into it," he said. "Just leave it alone." One night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to stay on the 7th floor after 2 a.m., just to see if anything would happen. I told myself it was all in my head, that the noises and flickering lights were just the quirks of an old building. At 2:15 a.m., the lights started to dim. The whispers began, faint at first but growing louder, like a dozen voices overlapping in the distance. I froze, my mop in hand, as the air grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. I turned toward the elevators just as the doors opened. The car was empty, as always. But as I stared at it, I saw something move in the reflection on the metal walls. A figure stood behind me, tall and shadowy, its face obscured. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the elevator, the figure was inside the car, staring at me through the reflection. "Leave," it whispered, its voice low and distorted. The doors slid shut, and the elevator descended. I didn't tell Carl about what I'd seen. I didn't even finish cleaning that night. I avoided the 7th floor for the next few shifts, doing just enough to make it look like I'd been there. But the floor didn't let me ignore it. One night, as I was cleaning the 8th floor, I heard the sound of a phone ringing. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was coming from the 7th floor. I tried to ignore it, but the ringing continued, growing louder and more insistent. Finally, I gave in. I took the stairs down to the 7th floor, my heart pounding with every step. The floor was dark, the lights flickering dimly. The ringing stopped as soon as I stepped into the hallway, leaving the floor in eerie silence. I walked cautiously toward the source of the sound, my footsteps echoing on the tile. Then I saw it. An old rotary phone sat on a desk in one of the cubicles. It wasn't plugged in, and the receiver was cracked, but I could swear it had been ringing. As I approached, the air grew colder, and I felt a faint pressure, like someone was standing too close behind me. I turned around, and the shadow seemed to shift. A figure emerged from the darkness, its face pale and featureless, its body unnaturally still. "Leave!" it whispered, louder this time. I ran. I bolted for the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. As I reached the stairwell, I heard the elevator ding behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was coming. When I reached the first floor, Carl was waiting for me. He took one look at my face and nodded. "You saw it, didn't you? What is it?" I asked, struggling to catch my breath. He sighed, lighting a cigarette. "No one knows. It's been here as long as the building has. Some people say it's a ghost, others think it's something worse. All I know is that it doesn't like people sticking around." I quit the next day. I haven't set foot in that building since, but sometimes, late at night, I dream about the 7th floor. I hear the whispers, the footsteps, and the faint ding of the elevator doors. And when I wake up, I swear I can feel the cold air pressing in around me. I was 18 when I got my first job delivering food for a small, family-owned diner. It wasn't glamorous, but the tips were decent, and the shifts fit around my classes. Most nights were uneventful, just me, my beat-up car, and the quiet streets of our sleepy town. But one night, a late delivery turned into something I'll never forget. It was a Wednesday night, about an hour before closing. The kitchen had already started winding down when an order came in from the outskirts of town. The house was way out, on a road that wasn't well lit and barely on the map. I hesitated, but the owner, Mr. Daniels, insisted we take every order seriously. So, I packed up the food, punched the address into my GPS, and set out. The drive was uneventful at first. The main roads were quiet, and the streetlights cast long shadows over the empty intersections. But as I got closer to the address, the GPS started to glitch. It kept recalculating, directing me down narrow, winding roads that I didn't recognize. Eventually, I found myself on a dirt path surrounded by dense woods. The trees loomed over the road, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The air felt heavier here, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires. Finally, the GPS announced, "You have arrived." The house stood at the end of the path, barely visible in the dark. It was old and crumbling, with boarded-up windows and an overgrown yard. The porch light flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across the front of the house. I parked the car and grabbed the food, my breath fogging in the chilly air. As I walked toward the porch, the sense of unease grew stronger. The house seemed abandoned, no lights inside, no signs of life. But the front door was slightly ajar. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "I have your order." No response. I stepped onto the porch, my shoes creaking against the warped wood. The door creaked open wider, revealing a dark hallway. A faint, musty smell wafted out, mixed with something metallic. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. From somewhere deep inside the house, a voice answered. "Come in. Leave it on the table." The voice was calm, almost friendly, but it sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and leave. But I didn't want to lose my tip, or get in trouble with Mr. Daniels. I stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me. The hallway was narrow and dark, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper. At the end of the hall, a dim light flickered from what looked like the kitchen. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The kitchen was empty, the light coming from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. I set the food on the table, glancing around nervously. "Thanks," the voice said, closer now. "But could you bring it to me?" My heart raced. The voice wasn't coming from the kitchen, it was coming from a doorway leading to the basement. The door was slightly ajar, and beyond it was nothing but darkness. "I think I'll leave it here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have a good night." I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, the basement door creaked open wider. "Please," the voice said, softer now. "It's just down here." The air grew colder, and I felt a faint pressure, like someone, or something, was watching me. I took a step back, my hand reaching for the flashlight on my phone. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved at the bottom of the stairs, barely visible in the faint light. It wasn't human, it was too tall, too thin, and its movements were jerky, unnatural. It tilted its head, and I swear I saw eyes reflecting the dim light, glowing faintly. I bolted. I sprinted out of the house, slamming the front door behind me. My car was parked just a few feet away, but it felt like miles. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard the front door creak open again. "Wait!" the voice called out, but it was distorted now, layered with something deeper, almost inhuman. I jumped into my car and started the engine, peeling out of the driveway without looking back. The dirt path seemed longer than before, the woods pressing in on either side. My headlights caught glimpses of movement in the trees, shadows darting between the trunks, too fast to be animals. When I finally reached the main road, I didn't stop driving until I was back at the diner. I parked and sat in the car, my hands shaking, trying to catch my breath. The next day, I told Mr. Daniels what had happened. He frowned, tapping the address into his computer. "That's strange," he said. "There's no house out there. Just an empty lot." My blood ran cold. I insisted that I had been there, that I had seen the house. But when we looked up the property records, the address didn't exist. The GPS had led me to nowhere. I quit the job a week later. I never delivered food again, and I never drove down those roads at night. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear that voice again, soft, calm, and inescapable. "Please, just down here,"